Welcome to the 25th Rumble. What an amazing series of events. The Rumble planning team that creates these community forums began in 2022. It's proven to be an excellent way to bring expert speakers, community advocates, and the public together in these times, to raise awareness of the CEI Hub risks and other important issues, and to encourage public action to reduce those risks. Would members of the committee who are here right now pop up so we can see you? Bonnie McKinley, Margaret Butler, Barbara Bernstein, already standing here, Kate Murphy, bravo, Lynn Handlin, she's somewhere here, okay, Jan Zuckerman, and Leslie's on a trip, and our usual moderator for many of these events, Deneen, is home with a new baby, which is very exciting. We're grateful to all of you. I'm going to do a very brief land acknowledgement, and that is, we're on the land of the Chinookan and the Kalapuyan speaking people. We honor the legacy they have left us with. Thank you. You may have to tell me over and over. I wanted to read a Hopi prophecy. It's too long, so I'm going to read part of it, but it's very moving, I thought. It is called, "We Are the Ones We Have Been Waiting For." You have been, and this is from June of 2000. You have been telling people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell people this is the hour. Are there things to be considered? Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It's time to speak your truth. Create your community. Be good to each other. And do not look outside yourself for your leader. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We want to say a sincere thank you to the Lloyd Eco District and Portland's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability for welcoming us into this spacious location. Thank you too to the Unprecedented Band. Are they still with us? They were great. Thank you to them. Wonderful. Check out the many co-sponsoring organizations for these rumbles. They'll be up on the screen in just a moment. They add their names in support of these community forums, helping our outreach that announce upcoming rumbles and bringing in tabling organizations. Before you leave tonight, if you haven't had a chance, do visit the tables in the back. I'm Nancy Heiser. I live in Linton, home to the CEI Hub, an extremely high-risk area. We've educated ourselves, shared information with members of the public, and called on officials in all levels of government who have the potential to avoid what is predicted to be the single greatest catastrophe in U.S. history. Our group of 4 community safety advocates, Tank the Tanks, part of Linton Neighborhood Association, is here tonight, represented by Sean Looney and David Labby. If you would stand, pop up, you can do this. Laurel Viles couldn't join us. I wouldn't be anywhere without these people today. For more than a decade, local advocates have become aware of the risks we're facing. The CEI Hub, where 90% of the state's fuel passes through, is what scientists call a wicked problem, with many complications that threaten life, safety, wildlife, the environment, and our economy. We're no safer yet after 10 years of working on this. The climate clock is ticking. We know earthquakes recur. The seismic clock is ticking. Is the question, What can we do about the CEI Hub? Or is the question, what must we do about the CEI Hub? The city has committed to a project to reduce risks. We're at a critical point now where we must work for real risk reduction. This rumble is dedicated to Bob Sallinger. Bob was a tireless environmental advocate and a fierce conservation warrior, in the words of his close friend and colleague, Mike Haupt. A uniquely compassionate person, he protected habitat and nursed injured wildlife. His scientific and legal expertise are renowned throughout the Pacific Northwest. Bob was a giant to many, organizing projects, leading committees, testifying at public hearings. Every time I heard him speak, I was inspired by his brilliance and his heart. More instructive than what he did was how he did it. He walked an incredible balance because he never shied away from speaking his truth to adversaries. But at the end of that meeting, he treated them as friends. He lived his philosophy that we are all in this together. Bob is deeply missed, and he continues to be a mentor. I, like many others, find myself saying, what would Bob do? Sarah Taylor knew Bob well, and she's going to say more about him now. Sarah?
Hi everyone. I also just want to thank the artist, Gina Parks. She's a teacher at McDaniels High School. And this is the fourth painting she's done for the Braided River Gallery. And a long time ago, when we started the Braided River campaign, we thought that if we painted portraits of real people who worked on the river, that it would make a difference, that people would see that people had fished and farmed and died and worked and played in that place. And we displayed those portraits at Linton, at Clackamas Community College, at PPS, City Hall, and it's finally landed here at Lloyd Center. And it's down in another storefront where this portrait of Bob will go as well. And I just really, the second we decided to add Bob to our gallery of portraits, I knew that I wanted Gina to paint that. And Gina, along with many other young artists, made all these amazing portraits to honor the people in the Lower Willamette. So big thanks to Gina. Okay, I'm just going to say a few things about Bob. I was on a lot of panels with Bob. His kids went to my school where I was a principal. But what I thought about today is the tools that Bob brought with him everywhere he went. And I think that I see Bob when he walks in a room. I see how he kind of moved his body, how his eyes twinkled, and how he would kind of look at me like, okay, now what? Now, Bob told me, you know, we just have to get through the EOA, Sarah. We just have to get through the EOA. I said, okay, I'm with you. We're going to get through the EOA. So this week, as many of you know, the city has asked us to look at the EOA, the CEI Hub, the Economic Opportunities Analysis. We're also looking at the tree code. We're looking at the E-zones. So I would love to say, okay, Bob, now what? You said we just had to get through the EOA, and now it appears that we have 5 things all happening at once. And it feels impossible to read all those documents and make sense of them. So what were the tools that Bob used? And I don't say it without some pain, because I know that even though I don't know, I saw him the day before he died, I don't know how those tools failed him, but I know that those were tools that he offered us. And of course, this is still, it's still painful. But I'll tell you what tools he had. He had his Volkswagen bus, as you all know, many of you know. Bob was willing to traipse. So I don't know how many of you use the word traipse, but I am a traipser and Bob was a traipser. That means that you drive, you get out of your car and you walk. You walk down by the river. You bushwhack to see where the tiny eggs are and if they're living. You are a bushwhacker. And Bob gives us the gift of driving across the state, seeing how things are connected, looking up at the sky, always listening to hear birds, even in the midst of confusion. So Bob gives us the gift of curiosity, and not just looking at our computer and statistics, but getting our feet dirty, getting our feet wet, and going out and looking at the world. Bob always brought either a binocular or a scoping scope with him. And so if you saw Bob, you saw that he was trying to look closer. So the gift that Bob gives us is that ability to take a closer look, to not take things at their surface, but to look closer, to look up at the sky. How many of us have been with Bob? We think we're talking about something, and he's like, listen, there goes the eagle. Listen. And he gave us that gift to stop what we're doing, look up the sky, and listen. He also gave us the gift of going to the source. So I don't mean just the source like the internet source, but going to where the creek started, going to where the river started, going to that place and seeing where that problem started. I say this because the most important thing to Bob, in my opinion, was the environment and was the animals, those things that could not talk for themselves. I believe that Bob thought, if a tiny Chinook salmon can get through the lower Willamette, the children that he loved, the city he loved, the people he loved would consequently survive. So the question I would have for you always is, as you look at these choices today, as you look at the other many choices that are being laid at our feet, to go back to the source and say, can that tiny salmon survive this choice? The Chinook are endangered. Thank you to Catalina for having the table on endangered species. If the Chinook is not safe, are our children safe? Is our community safe? Bob went back to that source. He wasn't trying to disregard other things. He believed if that tiniest of thing was safe, then the world would be safe. I will never talk about Bob without saying how much he loved his children. And he believed that the benchmark for safety for his children and all children was the tiniest of the tiny. So my commitment to Bob is to keep my feet dirty, keep going out in the rain, looking up at the sky, and going to the source and saying, if the tiniest amongst us can make it through this harbor safely, then we are all safe. I want to say one more thing, and that is that I thought of the songs when I was thinking of him before, and this morning I thought of the song Ripple. You know, he loved the Grateful Dead. He was kind of a Grateful Dead guy. So maybe play that song on your way home and think about Bob, and think about him as the person that dropped that rock in the water, and that we are his ripples. So when you hear that ripple, he dropped the rock, and now we are blessed with the opportunity to be the ripples that go out from him. Thank you.
Melanie Clout has a request of everyone.
So unfortunately, there's a conflicting event tonight, which is a birthday party for one of our environmental champions, Senator Confam. So I would like to have everybody, when I say 1, 2, 3, to say happy birthday, Con, so I can bring her the greeting from all of you who aren't able to be in 2 places at once. 1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday, Con!
Thank you.
The print program that you have in front of you looks like this. And on the back, and it talks about the panelists, has their bios and a quote. On the back is something you want to hang on to because it's contact information for all of the officials who would love to hear from you. You also have a card on your seat to write a question to any of the panelists. Raise your hand if you need a card, and we have Rumble Planning Committee people who will bring you another card. And these cards will be collected after the panel's presentations. We're going to have Q&A with the panelists, and there will be calls to action in the end. So we're going to get started. Nikki Mandel, CEI Hub Task Force.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you to the Rumble Committee and everybody who's here. This is like wonderful to see so many people out. The CEI Hub Task Force is a group of community volunteers who got together a little over 2 years ago. Our goal was to bring greater knowledge about the critical energy infrastructure hub. The CEI Hub Task Force is committed to helping a broader group of people know about the CEI Hub, understand the catastrophic threat it poses to the city and beyond, and to also reach out to our legislators and agency people at both the local and the state level to help to them understand the urgency and prompt them to action. So my task here at the beginning of this is to provide the context for what's going to come. I know, looking out, that some of you know a lot about the CEI Hub and don't need to hear more, perhaps, but some of you may not. So how many of you feel like you either don't know about it or just kind of slightly know and would like to have a better idea of what it is that we're talking about when we say CEI Hub? Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is especially for you. I'm going to run through it. I hope not too fast. Please feel free to ask questions later. The CEI Hub, Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub, is about a 6-mile stretch of above-ground liquid fuel tanks that spread north and south on the west side of the Willamette River, north and south of the St. John's Bridge. And they are on the riverside of Highway 30, and across Highway 30 is Forest Park. The property is private property. It's owned by about a dozen companies, and it's critical in many ways. One of the ways is that virtually all of the liquid fuels, diesel, gasoline, aviation fuel that's used in the state of Oregon comes in to that hub. And it holds a lot, as you can see. If all of the capacity of those fuel tanks spilled at once, which is what we're fearful of, we'll get to that, it would fill 530 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And I want you to keep the swimming pool thing in your head for just a minute here. And so I think we can go to the next slide, please, if you will. The fuel gets there through a pipeline. It's about 400 miles long, most of it, about 70% of it, through a pipeline that comes out of Puget Sound refineries down to the CEI Hub here in North Portland. And then there's an extension of that pipeline that goes down to Eugene. The fuel gets out of the hub and distributed both in the Portland metro area and around the state almost entirely by tanker truck. Some of it goes by barge up the Columbia River to Umatilla and Pasco. And I should mention the 70% that doesn't come in through the pipeline comes in by barge or by rail. So that's kind of what we've got here. If you go to the next slide, I forgot you to do that. This slide, which is kind of hard to see, but I didn't make it up, our Department of Energy did. But the brown lines here are kind of that distribution network of the tanker trucks, literally this kind of spider web of how the fuel gets distributed around the state. and it emanates, as you can see, from two primary places here. One. So why is it critical in another way? Let me count the ways, and if we go to the next slide, please. These are three images from the last section of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability's discussion draft that Tom Armstrong is going to share with us in a little bit, and we want you all to become more familiar with. And the CEI Hub is the area delineated in blue on these, if you can see that. The tank farms we're talking about are the black rectangles on there. The left picture is of the high hazard earthquake zone. The middle picture is of the high hazard landslide zone, and the right hand is the high hazard wildfire zone. The CEI Hub is right there at the heart of all of those. If we go to the next slide and we see like a kind of a real living picture, you see how these are stacked on top of each other. The CEI Hub is built on liquefaction soil. It's infill soil. In an earthquake, what the seismologists and geologists tell us uniformly is it's going to liquefy, spread laterally, and basically the bottom's going to drop out of whatever is there. Another danger that we know about, and is of increasing significance, is of wildfires. Because while we know that there's about a 40% chance of the great big CSE earthquake in the next 50 years, wildfires are coming with increasing frequency. And so that is a huge concern that we have as well in all of these. Next slide, please. So what's being done? And so in terms of context for this city plan that's going on, really the only thing in place of any significance right now, it's a huge, wonderful, big start, but it's absolutely not enough, is the fuel tank seismic stability program that was enacted by the legislature in 2022. The purpose is to make the fuel tanks, bulk fuel tanks in the state, more seismically safe. Over 90% of them at the CEI Hub were built before there was earthquake seismic code. They are not seismically safe. And the DEQ seismic stability program will give the facilities two options here. One is to come up to seismic safety by basically replacing with new built to current seismic code. The other option is to meet what's called the MAUS, maximum allowable uncontained spill. Now a contained spill means that maybe the tank itself, the metal tank, is broken. All the fuel will be contained into like a metal or concrete or whatever has been engineered, a big swimming pool that will be filled with the fuel that's spilled out of the broken metal tank. That's my lay version of this. And that's it. Most of the facilities at the CEI Hub are likely to pick option 2, the MAUS. In other words, if their tanks fail, the fuels will spill into a giant swimming pool. And we're not sure what after that. Okay, so where does this policy fit in with that? I'm going to skip the other two. We can come back to that. Next slide, please, which is my last one. The city has a role to play. The state absolutely has a role to play. There's some legislation we're looking at coming up to do other pieces of this puzzle. The city has authority over land use. And we want them to use that authority to make this situation better. When they applied for the grant that underpins this policy project, these were the objectives in the application. I want you to notice, to protect life, reduce injuries from natural hazards. See natural hazards in every one of these? Because there's a clear recognition of the natural hazards there. So whatever the city needs in other ways, the CEI Hub is not a place for flammable, combustible materials in a quadruple hazard zone from wildfire, from flood, from earthquake, from landslide. So that's kind of the context for where we're going. I did it? Thank you.
Hand this off to Micah Meskel, the Bird Alliance of Oregon, and that's the organization that was formerly Audubon.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Mickey, and thank you all. My name is Micah Meskel. I'm the Urban Conservation Director for Bird Alliance of Oregon. And before I start, I'd like to thank Sarah for her dedication to Bob Sallinger to start us off today. Bob, Bob made me the advocate I am today, and the person I am today, and I think he inspired many of you all in different ways. And I like to remember and take this opportunity to remind myself and others to thank those who inspire you, because it's very impactful, and it's an important thing we can do as a community. I think Bob was fearless against the most formidable of opponents, and for solving the most complicated issues. And I think that is very relevant to what we're discussing today, because it seems like an impossible problem to solve, and a foe that is too big. But if we take the long game, if we work together and take iterative steps, we can do it. And so I'd just like to ground us in that today. So you might wonder why Bird Alliance of Oregon is part of this presentation and is engaging with a critical energy infrastructure policy. And there are a couple of reasons. I'd like to start with the obvious, is the impact of a man-made or natural disaster to that infrastructure would be devastating to our entire ecosystem up and down river. So that is the clearest reason. But the hub and its status quo existence is also a huge hurdle to our just transition for our climate future. It's hardened and it is in place and it needs to be circumvented in order for us to transition our economy and to transition our society. And then lastly, the hardening of the CEI hub and the rest of the industrial river is in conflict with our goal of rewilding the Willamette and reconnecting it to its floodplain and reviving the ecological lifeblood that it is and has been since time immemorial in this space. Next slide. So when we talk about the CEI hub, it's really important to remember the geography that it sits in. It sits on the Willamette within North Portland. It is adjacent to Forest Park. It is overlaid with the the Portland Harbor Superfund site, which is a federally designated contaminated 11-mile stretch of the river that is in the process of being cleaned up. And the hub sits right in the middle of it, and thus affects those other resources. It also is immediately upstream of Sauvie Island and the Columbia Slough and the Columbia River, the confluence of the Willamette and Columbia, and 100 plus miles of Columbia River habitat that meanders from here to the ocean and spills into the Pacific Ocean in the estuary. And all those systems are intricately connected. They rely on each other, and they're all vulnerable to a disaster at the hub. And that is why one of the main reasons why we're all here today is the environmental potential catastrophe. And so that space is critical to a whole host of native wildlife, whether it's mammals, whether it's endangered salmon, whether it's native birds along their migratory flyways, and thus just raises the stakes of why it is so important for us to take action to mitigate that risk. So Bird Alliance of Oregon has been advocating on these issues, whether it's Forest Park, whether it's the Willamette River, and the Willamette River cleanup for decades, if not, well, actually I can say centuries. We've been around for over a century. And it's why we are still in this fight. We helped establish Forest Park 80 years ago, and we're still fighting to protect Forest Park, both against future development and risks like the CEI hub, and that's why we need to solve this problem. We have been advocating in the 70s and 80s, we advocated for the diversion of sewer into an actual treatment system. And in 2011, we accomplished that for the most part with the big pipe. And subsequently have been cleaning up the river via a designation of the Portland Harbor Superfund site and a record of decision. And we are committed to seeing that cleanup. And this puts it at risk. And so that's why we're still at the table and still fighting. And lastly, we are here because of the human impact that we care about as much as we care about the ecological impact, because we are part of the ecosystem. And this space, oh, sorry, I forgot to go to the next slide, the picture to show the, the visual. Apologies for that. So you can see the CEI Hub is in the lower portion of the Willamette River, and you can just see the connectivity here, where you have Forest Park, which is the largest urban forested park in the United States. It connects, it's part of the Tualatin Mountains, which are part of the Coast Range, so it's hugely important for habitat connectivity, for plants, animals, and birds, and as a recreational site for all of us. And it's literally next to the hub. We have the Willamette River, which feeds into the Columbia, where you can see that system that is at risk. Next slide. And then we even zoom out further, and we see this 100-mile stretch of Columbia River and thousands upon thousands upon thousands of acres of wild habitat that will all go away, will all be on fire when there's a catastrophe at the CEI Hub. And so, yeah, this is just a good reminder of why we are here at the table, all together, trying to find a solution to this very difficult problem.
Marnie Glickman, who's the Executive Director of the Braided River Campaign and a public interest attorney.
Good evening, everyone. Next slide, please. Hi, I'm Marnie Glickman. I am the new Executive Director of the Braided River Campaign. It was founded in 2021 by Sarah Taylor and Jan Zuckerman and many other people in this room. And tonight I'm going to be talking mostly about our home and all of the people who have lived here from the beginnings of time to our future, all in 5 minutes. Here's another map that I put together, and I titled this Our Home because this is our home. And as we think about the numbers and the catastrophes, I want us all to think about our neighborhoods. You can see in the bottom, I put that turquoise blob in as bulk fuel terminals. And I didn't use the word CEI Hub because it hasn't always been a hub. And I want us to remember that tonight. You can also see the turquoise oval that says cleanup area. That's the Portland Superfund site. It starts at the Broadway Bridge. And cleanup, people, starts next year and will be a big impact as we clean up the CEI Hub and make it safe. You can also see that turquoise rectangle, and that's called Giles Lake Industrial Sanctuary, which is an actual district. It was passed by the City Council in 2001, and you can read all about it on the city's website. Next slide. As we all know, we are not the first people here, and there have been people living here from the beginnings of time. And I was reading today, getting ready for this presentation, that there are Portlanders representing over 400 different tribes right now. Next slide. I picked this point, 1903, which was when the city of Portland started filling in this Giles Lake area. It took them 2 years. And then in 1905, when the World's Fair happened, more than 1.5 million people visited this new area. Next slide. There's been other things before the CEI Hub, in addition to the World's Fair. We actually had Giles Lake social housing. The Portland Housing Authority, some of us know, there was Vanport, there was also Giles Lake. More than 10,000 Portlanders live there in social housing. Next slide. Quickly, as the temporary social housing ended, it rapidly became the industrial sanctuary we all know now. It wasn't always called the CEI Hub back then. Next slide. So I'm setting up Tom and Tom's policy in this discussion so we can also think about not just our past, but our future. So as you've heard a little bit, we are working on our CEI Hub policies, which we hope the City Council will pass next year. And then, 2028. I thought I put that in for good cheer because we need to have a good election, presidential election in 2028 for our future, right? Let's be real. And 2035 is the year attached to our city's comprehensive plan. And there's so many smart city employees here who can talk much more eloquently about me and the comprehensive plan. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about it now because more than 20,000 Portlanders participated in creating this comprehensive plan, which lays out what we want to do for our city, our guiding principles, the policies that will make our city a much better place. 2040 is when our Superfund site cleanup will be done. And imagine that, a clean, safe river for fishing, for human access, for a new economy that is more revolved around the river. And then I put in there, which is important to the Braided River campaign, the 2050 Portland Emergency Work Plan has us reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Next slide. So these are the guiding principles that are in our city's 2035 comprehensive plan, but I think they're guiding principles a lot of people are inspired about. I think most of us, hopefully, maybe all of us can agree that these are guiding principles for what we want for our city's future and the CEI Hub policy development. Next slide. So this is not just about the 2025 and the nitty-gritty details, but as Tom starts talking and we start asking questions and we start engaging more and more about how to make these CEI Hub policies work well in the future, let's also think about what's gone before us and our future. So thank you. And before I hand, I also want to recognize, I think there's some Multnomah County commissioners here and maybe some other, I see Commissioner Moyer back there. Is there any other commissioners here, elected officials that I just want to recognize? Thank you for coming, Commissioner Moyer. And I want to call you out too because I was like, oh geez, I didn't even look at the Multnomah County plans when I was putting these slides together, and I'm like really embarrassed about it. So I betcha there's a lot of, this is a multi-governmental effort, and I'm calling myself out for that lack. So thank you very much. And next up is the man of the hour, Tom Armstrong.
Tom. All right, thank you. I'm Tom Armstrong. I'm a supervising planner with the city's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. We do the comprehensive plan, the long-range plan for the city, and in turn that gets implemented by the zoning code, which provides the guidelines and the rules about what can be built, where, how big it is. And so this project that we're doing is really focused on updating those policies. Right, we last did this back in 2016, and that was at the same time we were doing a project called the Fossil Fuel Terminal Zoning Code Project, which I'll talk about in a minute, but is really the baseline regulations that are in place today. Those were originally adopted in 2016. We went through 3 rounds of appeals by primarily by the Western States Petroleum Association, but we finally prevailed. And so that's our starting point. And so through this project, what we want to do is consider those policies, how it guides development and activities in the CEI Hub. And then in turn, and what I'll focus on tonight, is how do we implement those policies through additional zoning code regulations. And what's important to keep in mind with this is that this is really focused on development, especially new development. How we govern or limit the expansion or the activities at the fuel terminals in the hub. At the same time, you know, we are not directly addressing emergency management, spill response, and other issues like that. But we are taking advantage of this opportunity because as we put together these alternatives and as we forward a preferred alternative, we're talking to our other agencies within the city, within the region, at the state level, at the federal level. And so as we convene those agencies, we're also trying to leverage that point to talk about emergency management and take a more holistic view as to what needs to happen in the hub. So we're doing a little bit of that to address and acknowledge those larger issues. But again, what you're here tonight is mainly about the alternatives that we're putting forward on how to regulate development in the hub. A little bit about where we're at in this process. And as I said, you know, this is a conversation that has been happening for the last 12 years, you know, or more. And so we've built on a lot of those conversations, but we've been working in earnest since May on this project, and we've been holding community meetings and meeting with subject matter experts and other interested parties to develop these alternatives that you'll hear about tonight. But where we're at in this process, the star up there is what we call the discussion draft. And that's where all of your comments come to me, come to city staff. And we consider them and we look at what we hear and we essentially cobble together a preferred alternative. And that preferred alternative becomes what we call the proposed draft. And right now we're intending to publish that in early November. And that proposed draft goes to the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission holds another round of hearings and takes public testimony. And then they get to make changes and amendments to that proposal. And they eventually vote on a recommendation to City Council. And then we do it all again. Another round of hearings, more public testimony, Council gets to amend the plan, and then Council adopts the final plan. So, you know, we are in the middle of the process, and in terms of taking public comment and being able to shape alternatives and outcomes. But over the next 6 months, there's going to be lots of opportunity to engage in this process and let your views know. All right. So what you'll find in the discussion draft are 4 alternatives. And they build off of the baseline, what is adopted and in place today. And what we have are, you know, there's a prohibition on new bulk fossil fuel terminals. And we define bulk fossil fuel terminals as those largest terminals out there. They have more than 2 million gallons of fuel, which think of that as, you know, 1 large tank or 3 medium-sized tanks. So these are the big facilities out there. They also have to have what we call a regional connection. They have to have a connection to the Olympic pipeline that Nikki was talking about, or they have to have a dock, or they have to have rail access. So these are the bigger fuel terminals that bring the fuel into the region. And then, as Nikki explained, for the most part, trucks come to these terminals, they pick up the fuel and they distribute it to the rest of the state, or they barge it up to Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington. So what we've said is no new ones. You can't exceed that 2 million gallon limit. And then what we then said is for the existing ones, we're going to limit your development. And the where council landed in 2016 was no new fossil fuel tanks. And then they added a few exceptions to that no new fossil fuel tanks. The most important ones and the biggest ones are for aviation fuel, jet fuel, because that was at the time and still is sort of the only liquid fuel segment that is forecasted to increase in demand. And then renewable fuels. There's an exception for renewable fuels to help with the transition from fossil fuels to renewable fuels, and then eventually to electrify our transportation system. We also allow for the repair and replacement of existing tanks to go along with the DEQ seismic stability program. We want these companies to be able to improve their existing tanks, to make them safer, and so there's allowances for that, to replace their tanks, to reconfigure their tanks, to take a bunch of small ones, say take 3 25,000 gallon tanks and make one new 75,000 gallon tank, but to seismically improve those. So that's our starting point that we're working from. And then I'm going to go through 4 alternatives. These are progressively more restrictive compared to what is allowed today. And I think this is an important point, is that we get into sort of risk reduction and what is that risk. And from a land use planner, one of the risks is what are the companies allowed to do today? And that is these exceptions. Like a company comes in today and says, oh, I want to build a bunch of new tanks for jet fuel. The city says, well, our zoning code allows it. We can't say no to you. We can't deny it. And so what we're talking about is putting new regulations in place that provide those limits or those guidance or those prohibitions on that type of development. And so as I go through this, we get progressively more restrictive, and then eventually alternative 4, based on public feedback that we heard since May and the meetings we've had, we have an alternative that actually reduces that capacity over time, and I'll explain that. So alternative 1, again, it is an incremental improvement on what we have today. One of the issues that we've heard is a concern about, we have a limit on fossil fuel tanks, but we don't have a limit on what's called the transloading capacity, the pipes that connect it, the pumps, and that if the companies can just increase those pipes, increase those pumps, and they can just move more fuel through their existing system. And so this alternative would place limits, prohibit new fossil fuel transloading infrastructure. They would still be able to replace that infrastructure with safer infrastructure. So think of it if they had a 6-inch pipe today, they could replace that with a safer 6-inch pipe, but they could not replace it with an 8-inch pipe that would allow them to move more fuel through the system. We would also require any new storage tanks that would be built to a higher seismic safety standard. In the terms, it's called risk category 4, which is think of that as the highest construction standards. We want these things to survive an earthquake. Right now, that gets applied to things like hospitals and fire stations. We want this to apply, be clear that it's city policy that this applies to storage tanks for two reasons. One, we want these tanks to survive because we're going to need that fuel as part of the disaster recovery. And two, we don't want all that fuel spilling into the river and burning and being a hazard, the post-disaster hazard that it represents. And then the fourth element of this alternative, and again, this was in response to things that we heard from our community meetings, was to continue to allow renewable and aviation fuel expansion, but require those expansion proposals to go through what we call a conditional use review. So we would have discretionary review standards, like site that tank on the safest part of the site, ensure that it's built to the highest safety standards, that it's not going to cause harm to the river or the surrounding community, and that as part of that conditional review, there would be public notice, there would be opportunity for public comment, there would be review, it would probably go to a hearings officer, it would be appealable to city council. It's similar to the environmental review that goes on today, that the PGE transmission line through Forest Park went through, something akin to that. So that's alternative one. Alternative two, looks at, includes the same prohibition on fossil fuel transloading and places stricter limits on aviation and renewable fuel expansions. Instead of having that sort of conditional use review process, we would say that, okay, each terminal can expand by 5%, a strict limit, a cap on what they can do, based on 5% of their existing storage capacity. But before you can expand, you have to have a facility-wide containment, that swimming pool that Nikki was talking about. And what we would hope this would be is an incentive to accelerate implementation of their DEQ seismic risk mitigation plans. Build that wall around your facility as soon as possible if you want to expand. You have to do that first before you're eligible to expand. And then the other important thing is, and again, this is sort of going hand in hand with the DEQ program, is to say that being clear, as part of that risk category 4, that any new storage tank, not only are we talking about the above ground structure, but the below ground has to have what's called ground improvement. Think of pilings, or sometimes they inject grout or concrete into the soil to stabilize the soil that tank sits on. So again, sort of ratcheting up the seismic improvement standards, I guess in a way, not solely relying on DEQ, but also having city standards that parallel DEQ to say, this is what we expect any new improvement to be at those terminals. The third alternative sort of gets rid of all that and says, no new expansions. We have enough capacity. We look at the fuel demand curves. We expect as our transportation system electrifies, the demand for liquid fuel is going to decline over time. We don't need new capacity. Companies, you figure out how to use the existing capacities. The demand curves that I've seen is that the demand for gasoline for light vehicles and cars and light trucks is going to decline faster. That's going to electrify first. you can take those existing gasoline tanks and you can put renewables in them, you can put aviation fuel in them. Just figure out how to use what you got. And the same sort of prohibition on transloading infrastructure comes along with that. And then the fourth alternative builds on that and says, you know what, no more expansion, and we see this demand curve dropping for liquid fuels, and that you should, and again, this is in response to what we heard from the community, you should draw down, take some of that capacity offline as it's no longer needed. And what we've proposed in this alternative is a 17% drawdown in storage capacity by 2035. And we picked those two numbers. We picked 2035 because that sort of parallels the DEQ implementation time period. It's probably at this point going to be 2036, 2037. But the companies are on notice that, hey, we're going to want you to reduce your capacity, so don't bother improving that tank over there because we're just going to tell you not to use it. We came up with 17% based on the most recent federal energy forecast for the Pacific region. And we used the Pacific region because just recognizing that the hub serves more than the state of Oregon. It serves Southwest Washington, it serves Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon, a little bit wider area, but at least we start to get that drawdown. We put the companies on notice that we expect you to start taking that capacity offline as the demand for liquid fuel decreases. So those are the four alternatives. I guess I got two. This is a link to our website. There's also a handout at the front table. We are taking public comments through October 17th. This is it again. And this is the second of a number of events that we're having over the next 2 or 3 weeks. We have a public open house at the Portland building next week. We have a virtual online session. Willamette Riverkeeper, we're partnering with them to put on a webinar next week. We have another open house. I think it's going to be at the St. John's Community Center on October 7th. We are doing an informational briefing to the City Council, to the Climate Resilience and Land Use Committee on October 9th. So there's lots of opportunities to have this discussion about which alternative or which ideas that we put together to create a preferred alternative. And then right now we are going to publish that preferred alternative on November 10th, 35 days ahead of the first Planning Commission hearing that will take place on December 16th. So that's the process going forward. And I think I'm going to turn things back to Nancy.
You've heard a lot. Hopefully this is of interest and informative to you. Now we're going to take about 30 minutes to have a panel discussion about some questions we have here, and then we're going to have the Q&A. Okay? So if you need to stretch, that's good, but we're going to get started. The first question we have is, how is this draft plan protective against the current attempt by industry representatives to weaken the renewable fuel standards? Very recent development.
I would say that it's not connected. It's two different programs at BPS, and we're really talking here about the infrastructure at the hubs, and that the renewable fuel standard is really about the quality or the type of fuel, the carbon content of fuel that's available or required to be sold in Portland, and that's very separate from the tanks and the infrastructure.
Nancy, did you ask if it was protective? Against, yeah. I don't think that this CEI Hub policy will protect against renewable fuels. I am a little confused about the question.
Being weakened by industry reps.
I don't believe that the CEI Hub policy development will protect against the renewable fuel standard recommendations and future changes. And I would say that that's my understanding procedurally.
That's my understanding as well. I will note that in the current zoning code regulations, there is an exception for new facilities that are needed to comply with the city's renewable fuel standard. Because the city standard is different from the state standard or even the federal standard. And what we've heard from the companies is that they need to have a special tank for the city's renewable fuel standard. And so one of the questions would be, under any of these alternatives, do we maintain that allowance for the small amount, I don't know what Portland makes up of the whole state fuel consumption, but it's probably less than 20%. So do we maintain that exception for the companies to build renewable fuel standard tanks? Would be one question as part of this process, but I think it's separate from a decision about what is essentially the carbon intensity content of the fuel that is being talked about by the renewable fuel standard.
I was going to say something procedural. Why don't you go first?
Thank you for clarifying that new wrinkle. I hadn't heard that, Tom. I want to make a point, and that is all the fuels, whether they are renewable, fossil, some combination of renewable or fossil, are flammable and combustible. Otherwise, they won't work doing what they're supposed to do. So asking for any exception that would increase anything that's out there, and or alternatives 1 or 2, which allow increase, is explicitly increasing the risk. There's no other way to put it. And I just have to say, the analogy that came to me, I have a little bit of a disagreement with BPS's definition of risk. I remember a friend telling me once, I just saved $50 on buying a new sweater. I wasn't going to buy it, I don't need it, but it was on sale. And that's kind of like saying we reduced the risk because they could have built a lot more, or they had the exception. And I just think that that is a really false way to define risk. The risk is what we have right now. It's risky. We don't need any more.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question is, given that biofuels do not significantly reduce carbon emissions, how do the first 3 options foster a transition to a low carbon economy in accordance with Policy 6? Policy 6 is part of the comprehensive plan.
Back to you, Tom.
Again, it's outside of my expertise, but I think that question is debatable. And I think our analysis shows that the renewable fuels are lower carbon, and to the extent, especially like things like renewable diesel that can be burned in existing diesel engines in the short term, during the transition, it's a better outcome than burning fossil diesel until we get to a point where we have the technology for electric heavy-duty trucks and other equipment like that.
I think this is a good time for me to address where we are in the process for the Renewable Fuels Standards Technical Advisory Committee recommendations. So the Renewable Fuels Technical Advisory Committee is comprised of 7 people, and they met today, and they are recommending that we pause the lowering of the carbon intensive number, the CI number. And my understanding is that well, first of all, for people, bringing everyone up to speed, so there are 7 members of this committee, and several of them are owners of these bulk fuel terminal, they're bulk fuel terminal operators at the CEI Hub. I was in, there's an Oregonian story about this. I have real concerns, as many of us do, about conflicts of interest. And so the recommendations might change they might change the carbon intensity, but as Nikki said, they're still flammable.
We're going to shift a little bit. Why wasn't there rigorous tribal outreach conducted from the very, very beginning of this process instead of waiting until June of this year?
Well, the project got started this spring, and tribal engagement has been part of this project. I met with representatives from the Grand Ronde tribe this morning. We continue to have outreach to the tribes that are interested in weighing in. It's part of the process.
I noticed the other week that the government relations office was still looking for a tribal government relations person. Do you know if they filled it yet? And I know it's not your bureau.
That is a different office.
Yeah. No, I shouldn't have asked you.
We're going to hit maybe 2 more fairly quickly, and they're heading toward Tom, but if anybody else has comments, we certainly welcome them. In option 4, why is the drawdown limited to 17% by 2040, which is not compatible with the city climate emergency declaration goal of 50% by 2030?
There is a disconnect there, but I think the city's goal is for carbon reduction from all sectors, not just the transportation, which is where most of the liquid fuel sectors are. And again, the hub serves more than the city. It serves 90% of the state of Oregon, it serves Washington, parts of Idaho. So we took a little bit wider look by using the federal forecasts to set that number as a starting point.
I'm going to jump in quickly about this too. Tom, I thought you did a great job presenting the 4 policy alternatives that are out there, but I want everyone here to know that we aren't limited to those 4 policy alternatives. So for example, Braided River Campaign is interested in advocating for an 80% drawdown at the CEI Hub by 2050, so we can not rely on market forces to get to net zero. And so this is, we are still in, the other reason why this is important to know now is that the discussion draft is where we can have big impact. The proposal is, these are policy alternatives, and we can come up with alternative 5, 6, 7, well, I don't know if you number them that way, but we're not limited to these 4, so keep thinking about that as the event continues. Thanks.
I do want to acknowledge some really wonderful things that are in the draft that we hope will stay in there. One of them is, and Tom talked about this, the requirement to build up to risk category 4, and that's great. Although I'm going to pull that back a little bit. That's just for new construction, and so that really needs to be applied to everything, retrofits and upgrades. I don't know if that's even possible. Let's not fool ourselves that applying that to new and replacement does it for everything. I don't know if it does. In terms of the alternatives and the drawdown issue, I want us to think about the difference between capacity and throughput. Because if we have tanks that aren't entirely full and we just say, okay, you know, you just keep it where it is or you draw it down, but they can fill them more, we could actually see an increase. So I think we need to be very thoughtful and ask BPS to make sure that we understand what's being drawn down specifically. And I'm getting tapped, so I'm stopping over here.
We've got one more question, then we're going to ask for Megan Moyer, the Commissioner of the county, to make some brief remarks, and we're going to take your questions. So hang on, we haven't forgotten you. Last question here. While the first three options suggest meager safety solutions, they don't draw down the number of dangerous materials at the hub. So how do these truly follow the goal of the grant to reduce harm?
I'll say it again. It's compared to what? And right now, any company can come in and request 2, 3, 5 million gallons worth of storage for aviation fuel or renewables, and the city cannot legally deny them. And so we are trying to close that loophole and therefore reducing the risk that future development represents under current rules today. That's how immediately all of these reduce the risk. And now the question is by how much? I will also caveat that the drawdown is legally risky. It's not clear we have the authority to force a business to stop doing what they're doing. We have had problems with other types of businesses. There's a large number of case law and a suspect Supreme Court decisions around what are called regulatory takings. And so, you know, I would expect any drawdown option where we are forcing a company to take stuff offline will be a long, drawn-out legal battle that, you know, we can take on.
We certainly don't want the city spending more money on long, drawn-out legal battles, but we do need to make sure that we're safer. I am kind of curious, could those facilities be declared non-compliant? And what would that mean if a facility wants to upgrade or retrofit or something like that?
Yeah, I think that begins to look like alternative 3, which is like you have, usually the phrase in the zoning phrase is called non-conforming. And usually, you know, under most zoning code rules, you're allowed to continue to use that development. If the rules change on you, we don't go and make you immediately upgrade or fix the problem, right? The electrical codes in all of our houses are improve every year, but we don't require you to pull out that knob and tube wiring out of your attic and replace it, or replace that electrical panel with something safer. So in that sense, our authority there is limited, and that's why I say, especially through the zoning code, is limited by new development, and you know, almost the companies have to opt in to make improvements. And I think that's where the DEQ seismic stability, they have a different authority. They can require the companies to make improvements. Now, you know, again, this project is focused on the zoning code. We can work with DEQ, we can work with the State Fire Marshal Office, we can work with other programs that have other authorities, but that's going to take more time to figure out where those levers are to put in those requirements. The DEQ air quality permit is one thing.
I was at a 350 PDX meeting for the mighty fossil fuel resistance team the other night, and one of the volunteers asked me a question. well, if I wanted to build a bulk fuel terminal in my backyard, I know the city wouldn't let me do that. And so for people who are not up on all the zoning code, could you explain for the volunteer who I don't know if is in the audience?
That's correct. You know, we have rules that govern development in different parts of the city, and so our rules right now, you know, you can't. I don't know what they are exactly off the top of my head, but that's sort of fuel distribution use is an industrial use. We only allow it in industrial areas.
Okay.
So, and then with these current standards, you can only go up to 2 million gallons of storage.
Right.
We're not going to allow you to build more than that.
And so because the person lives in St. John's neighborhood, they couldn't build it because of the neighborhood, like it's zoning code
Correct.
for the neighborhood district.
Right.
And so if she wants to build a fossil fuel terminal, she has to move to the Giles Lake Industrial Sanctuary District. That's basically.
But that terminal can't have more than 2 million gallons.
That's what I'll
Yes.
tell her.
Thank you, Tom. And I think I'm just going to make a sort of general observation or statement. We understand that there are legal risks and a certain appetite for risk at the city. We also know as advocates it's our job to push the city outside of that status quo comfort zone. And I think that's what we are here today to do. I think also we know those legal constraints maybe restrict this policy, but this is not the only policy that that is overlaid over this sort of operation or land use or risk. And so it is essential that we are thinking about both this policy and adjacent policies and future policies that haven't even been considered. And then lastly, there is the demand side. And as we're thinking about aviation fuel specifically, there are the airlines and the conglomerate of airlines at the airport. There is the Port of Portland as well. And the port is a quasi-public entity that should be responsive to the public. And they're taking efforts to reduce the risk by building some tanks on, or reduce the risk within the CEI Hub by building tanks at the airport. And they could do more of that to reduce that specific risk at the CEI Hub and the liquefaction zone. And so we need to be thinking about all of those opportunities, pushing and pulling all of those levers. And this is one piece, and we should be pushing the city to think about option 5, option 6, option 7, and we need to be taking efforts to also embolden the county and embolden DEQ and the state. And so maybe this is a good transition to Commissioner.
Megan Moyer, Commissioner, Multnomah County District. I always screw this up. 1, I know you're 1.
Okay, so hi, I'm Megan Moyer. I'm Multnomah County Commissioner for the CEI Hub. And when I was elected, I made a commitment to the outgoing Commissioner Sharon Myron that I would continue her work on the CEI Hub. And have partnered with Commissioner Singleton on how to move the work forward. We have been working now on this for 10 months. We did take a break when the legislature had a bill that they were moving. I did not support that bill, but because of the preemption of local action. But I didn't want to be a hindrance to it either. So after the legislature adjourned without passing that legislation, Commissioner Singleton and I brought it back up and are happy to announce that we are largely in the final stages of drafting our resolution, and we'll be ready to share that once we get it back from our legal counsel at the county. What is different in ours from previous versions of note is that we are not ready to set a insurance cap at 300 million. We don't think that that's probably enough. So we will not put in that cap. We will have an advisory committee where the majority of members are community members of affected communities and the areas near the CEI Hub. There will be other representatives, but we are not interested in this being an industry-run process. And we're going to set an insurance requirement minimum that is appropriate to the level of risk. The second thing that we are doing that is different from other proposals that have been brought forward is we are extremely concerned about our ability to respond in an emergency and are unwilling to wait for litigation to be reimbursed. So we will be requiring that within the overall insurance amount that the county's emergency response funds will be protected by every owner having to purchase within their insurance portfolio a parametric bond, a trust fund, or a surety bond, naming Multnomah County as a co-insured entity that allows a payout at point of a triggering event. Our current estimation of, and I am being very clear, this is purely Multnomah County's responsibilities. It does not touch environmental quality or the city of Portland. Multnomah County's response, largely under our public health responsibilities, is estimated currently at between $110 to $150 million in the first year. For us, our worst case scenario due to public health is an explosion, which could require us to evacuate thousands of individuals for an undetermined amount of time. We would certainly have to do extensive monitoring as winds move and other factors. And so for me, and this is the area that I have spent the most time on in the joint proposal, I am unwilling to foot that bill. And to be totally honest, Multnomah County does not have a spare $150 million sitting in a bank for an emergency response. So I am so thankful for the work of everybody here, because we would not be where we're at. I feel very confident that the county commission is committed to addressing CEI Hub. And obviously I can't say how people will vote because I'm not allowed to have those conversations in private. But I will say I feel very, very optimistic that we will be passing this before the end of the year.
The county's had quite a legacy with us. They stepped up before any other governmental agency did with a number of things, town halls and a suit, and they've just done an incredible amount. So to hear Commissioner Moyer take this on makes us pleased. Let's just say that. Okay, we are ready for some audience questions. Is that right? I've got them. Zenith Energy, as you know, was recently granted their land use compatibility statement. What monitoring and controls will hold Zenith accountable for their compliance of their agreed upon products? And that is specifically for Tom.
Again, outside my area of expertise, but my understanding is that there is provisions, and we also have these provisions in our what's called our franchise agreement that allows Zenith to put their pipes in the right of way. Is it allows for third-party monitoring and testing to make sure that the material that's in the tank is what it's supposed to be used for, and that's for any of these exceptions. That's the sort of system that the conditions of approval on that sort of development would be to make sure that either they submit reports to the city would have third-party inspectors, similar to what DEQ does for the air quality permits or for the state fire marshals in terms of reporting, but also verification of that.
What percentage of the tanks are full? We know from the Multnomah County report of 21-22, they took the average of 67% fill. And does anybody know if it's much different than that now at the hub?
No. We are trying to work with the state fire marshal's office to get information on how much fuel is moving through the hub based on the reports that the state fire marshal gets on a quarterly or annual basis. But no, I don't know. And that gets to the throughput question. There's also an operational question, like the tank may be 100,000 gallons, but usually the operational capacity is 80% of that. So we just don't know at any given time how much fuel is in any given tank.
Can the city require some, I mean, you don't have the process in place, but is that something that could be required, that you would have that information on some basis? Like, I don't know if it's like daily, I'm not saying that, but is that something that the city can legally do?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that would be some, similar to like the relationship between the state fire marshal and the city fire marshal. It would have to be obviously another program outside of the land use and zoning realm, but there might be opportunities there too. But again, it is setting up and administering and staffing a whole new regulatory program.
Risk bonding has been out there for a while now, and it was taken up by the state, and the county's been working on that. Why isn't the city interested in any risk bonding?
This is a short answer. It's because the county took the lead, and we've been happy to support them in that, and we helped fund the original risk assessment, but they've taken the lead on that issue, and we're happy to let them do it. And I think there is a legal issue there that, again, as the commissioner said, their public health authority is a better, in the state, city, county sharing of authorities and jurisdiction. The public health authority is a stronger place for that type of requirement.
The 17% drawdown, that was present in one document, and online it was listed at 30%. We were told that was just an error. Did you in fact consider a higher percentage of drawdown at some point? And why did you reject that if you did?
It was a placeholder as we were doing trying to figure out what methodology to use. The methodology, again, as I explained, was based on that federal energy forecast. If there are other ideas or other methodology, tying it to our climate goals or something else, we benchmarked it to the federal forecast and to the DEQ implementation period of 2035. But that original 30% was a placeholder, and in putting out all our materials, we didn't get everything.
Can I slightly answer that question too, please? Take Tom totally off the hot seat for 1 minute. This is an opportunity to remind people that the Bureau employees are making these policy alternatives, and we, the people, get to decide to share our own ideas for that QR code. And so you can do it now. And you can talk to your counselors too. I have to say, like, we are now in District 2, so, it's a good idea to talk to the ones that you live in. But I just wanted, it's just, we are the people, and we get to participate as much as the BPS staff.
And I'll just go ahead and put forward another potential that maybe would be 30%. So one of the good things I think that's in the discussion draft, and this goes into the weeds for some folks, but Comprehensive Plan Policy 6.48 is just one that you specify in particular. You're going to remove the language, quote, to serve the regional market, and yet you're talking about the fact that the hub does serve more regionally. So one, hooray to remove the fact, that you're going to remove the regional market. Let's run with that in this. The state's energy strategy plan, which is in draft form right now, is going to state legislature, and next month I believe it is, has amongst its materials a modeling for increasing our reliance on electricity, electrical power, and the counterpart of that is how much the drawdown might be under the lowest cost scenario, not the most aggressive, but the lowest cost scenario in that transition pathways that they offer. That calls for, that projects a 70% decline in liquid fuel needs in the state between now and 2050. So let's think about how can we support the state's transition projections at the lowest cost projection, not the most aggressive one, and let's think about that 30% more seriously.
Glad you're listening because that is astute. Okay. Why is there no mention of creating new fuel storage facilities in other parts of Oregon that would reduce the rest here and spread it out? Diversification. And, yes, we've talked about that for a long time. What are the anticipated pushbacks from industry? This was a bill in the state last round. Nikki and I worked on that quite a bit.
Well, I don't want to speak for Tom and the city, but the city can't tell the rest of the state what to do. So I will say that one of the things that's in the discussion draft, again, it's wonderful, is talking about working with other government entities on this. And again, an in the weeds thing, the language that's in our comprehensive plan has meaning. If the comprehensive plan says encourage, that's different than require. So I would urge the city in developing this to go to Planning Commission and further. Instead of saying encourage, and I think that's the word, support or encourage working with other government entities, require. Yeah, make it mandatory. And again, that's really to push the state, because the city cannot tell the rest of the state what to do. Well, on the diversification front, this is really problematic. I mean, we have, I'll just take a few minutes talking about the state level here. One is, as I said before, 70% of the fuels we get in right now are coming through a pipeline into Portland. So if it's not going to be at the hub, which I don't think it should be, but if it's not going to be there, how is it going to get to wherever else it's going to go? And the other thing, and it's more than that, but another thing that's very important is we don't want to turn any other areas into the kind of sacrifice zone that Portland is. So we need to think about not only locating in other areas of the state, where there's not wildfire and seismic risk and tsunami risk and so on, but we also don't want to say, oh man, that neighborhood over there would be really great. We'll just put it across the street from them, which is a plan going on right now in West Eugene that they're fighting down there. There is an effort on the part of Rep. Tran, who is also talking about a risk bond bill, carried them last session, to revisit a bill for some kind of distribution for emergency response. So the state, as in some legislators, are looking towards that. It would be great if the city of Portland and if Multnomah County were partners in that effort.
Can I comment?
Yes.
I'm not a panelist, but I'll comment. Thank you. The diversification means that a facility needs water transport, they need rail, and they need pipeline. Where does that exist? They've looked at a number of places without the state that were potential. They had to rule out a ton because they were seismically not stable and other issues and other issues. Why doesn't the industry want to move? It's going to cost them a heck of a lot of money. They know they're on a drawdown. Do they want to spend the billions of dollars or whatever it takes to find alternative locations when in fact fossil fuels are going to be drawing down? Those are called stranded assets. And the legislature is very sensitive to that. So there's a number of reasons that the facilities don't want to change, but they didn't want to submit to legislation, and DEQ now has authority over those with 200 million gallons anyway, 2 million gallons.
Is that adequate? Anything else? Thank you.
I think you've answered this, and somebody else may know too, maybe Nikki. Who provided the projections for SAF that determined the increase for future demands? Go ahead.
But it's the Federal Energy Information Administration, EIA, and they produce an annual report within both a trends analysis that shows that, reinforces essentially alternative 3, that for most other fuels, for the last 20 years, almost 30 years, the demand has been flat, right? There isn't a need for all this extra capacity. But it does show aviation fuel slightly ticking up over time, but it's about 10% of the fuel consumed in Oregon. And then again, we use the EIA forecast out to 2035 to come up with the 17% figure.
We haven't played acronym bingo yet, so SAF is Sustainable Aviation Fuel.
And sustainable aviation fuel must be at least 50% fossil fuel for it to work. So it's not exactly fully sustainable.
There are 600 tanks, 500 tanks at the hub, different counties, different counts from different sources. About 140 are decommissioned, out of service. We don't know the actual level of decommissioning. It can mean different things according to different agencies. Can the city move to decommission tanks, more tanks, or even remove those that are already considered out of service or decommissioned that are in existence? Now, these are all above ground storage tanks. We know how old they are. Can the city act on any of those?
I think that's one of those legal gray areas that we can figure out or find out or try and defend in a legal challenge. But that's one of the things that we're looking at.
So, in my experience as a Portlander, I hear, the question of what's legal and what's not. And so how do we advocates know, when you're asking if how do you interact with city attorney's office? Like, can you tell us a little bit about what happens behind the scenes?
Yeah, we, not so much at this alternatives phase, but we do consult with our city attorneys. And obviously, we've been working at this issue for the last 9 years. So, we have a sense of where those legal boundaries are. But the more we get zone in on a preferred alternative, the more we think about how we construct the code, the more review we get from the city attorneys. But obviously, we're interested in your outside legal opinion as to, hey, and we also look at what other cities are doing in other parts of the country. They may have a slightly different legal authority, but they give us some ideas on what might work and what might not work.
I just want to comment on these decommissioned tanks. Some of them are probably emptied, cleaned, and the piping is disconnected, and there is a promise to never be used again. That is an EPA regulation. Others may have been just, oh, we're not going to use these. We don't know what they've done with them. But the reason facilities will not want to remove them, quite probably, is the cost involved. And guess what they're going to find when they remove them? They're going to find spills into the soil that will make them Superfund and financially responsible. So if you didn't know that, I'm just throwing that out there. Okay, back to SAF. 10:30, we're gonna, no. All right, good, well, all right, we're gonna keep going. How is the projected increase in SAF different than industry claiming a demand for renewable diesel? And before that, LNG. This is what industry always said, we need more.
Well, what in again, to Nikki's point, SAF is the renewable component of aviation jet fuel. It is, you take the renewable SAF and you mix it 50-50 with jet fuel, and that's what some of the airlines have started to burn. It's what the Port of Portland expresses interest in encouraging more use. I've lost my train of thought now, but just future demand. So I don't know that we're for SAF, we came up with the 5% in that we looked at, right now, the port is updating the PDX master plan. And they have a new airline operation forecast that goes out to 2045. And so if you look at that forecast, it's very crude math, but if you look at that forecast, it comes out to about, they need 40% more fuel than what they're using today. And so, so based on that, but aviation fuel is still a small component of all the fuel out there. And so the 5% cap gives room for about, I think it works out to about, that's about 40% of that 5% increase, and the other 60% could be available for renewables if the terminals want to get into that business. But that's how we were sort of benchmarking that 5%, to make sure there was enough for the aviation fuel to meet that forecasted demand and enough for renewables.
Thank you, Tom, for reminding us all that, the Port of Portland is going through this planning process, of which we'll have public comment opportunity to weigh in on if we feel that the continued expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure or more planes that use SAF, which is 50% fossil fuel, if an increase in projections is what we want for the airport and for our community. And so that will be an upcoming public process that, as I mentioned earlier, like, we're here to talk about the CEI Hub Policy, but it is all connected. And so, it makes our jobs really difficult because it is whack-a-mole to a dozen or so processes led by a dozen or so public agencies, but those are each small individual levers that can be used for our collective goal.
I'll add in here, not encouraging additional infrastructure, but Portland Fuel, which is the consortium of the airlines out at the airport, PDX Fuel is the only one within this state program that actually followed the regulations, submitted their risk assessment, basically completed on time, submitted a risk mitigation plan, basically complete and on time, got an approval through the public comment and DEQ evaluation, has committed to taking down, fully replacing up to current code the tanks out at the airport. And I'm just telling you what's in the plan. I don't know. I'm guessing the DEQ evaluates this correctly. They have a footprint out there where they can put more storage capacity, which means it does not have to be in the hub. So even if, and this is an if, but even if the city decides, yes, or Port of Portland decides, yes, we're going to expand the amount of fuel we need out there, of SAF or whatever, it does not have to be in the hub. There's space for it out at the airport. And I want to sneak in a question around that, and that is that the discussion draft refers to a consultant you've hired who's doing projections, and we're all talking about these projections from EIA. I mentioned you've got lists of different state departments, or state of Oregon departments. Is this, sorry, I just had this picture of the Wizard of Oz and the curtain, and then suddenly there's like this new report that projects something else that shapes what you're doing. So one, please dissuade me of that, but what's the question you're asking, and why would their projections of fuel demand, need, whatever, trump, pardon me, whatever else you've referred to?
Yeah, so as part of our climate program, we do our own energy modeling. Primarily that's been more on for Portland itself and sort of doing carbon emission estimates and everything like that. And the consulting firm is Parametrics. They're a big national global firm, but they have offices here in Portland that do that kind of work. And so when we bump into this problem of like, hey, how much fuel is going through the CEI Hub? How much do we need? Where are we going? They were someone that we already had under contract through our climate program that is capable of doing this work. And so we thought, well, we would get some extra help, another piece of information that could be weighed with the state energy strategy, the federal forecast. So we look at the ODOT revenue forecast. Those are shorter term. The DEQ Clean Fuels Program forecasts, that's shorter term. But it just helps build a body of evidence that, hey, the arrow is pointing down. We can argue about how fast it's going down, but I guess some of that reflects on the last 3 rounds of legal appeal, where we were trying to just argue that it is flat or going down, right? And so it's another piece of information.
Here's a question, probably be our last one, but all of the questions you have submitted will be given to the city to get them to respond in writing. I'm not sure our mechanism for getting them back to you, and I'm not sure how you feel about that, Tom, if you post them on the website or...
Do that.
We'll do something, but I think this you'll be interested in. What criteria is BPS using to process public comments and to reach decisions on the final policy proposal that will go to the Planning Commission?
They are public comments. It's not a vote, but we look at the body of evidence. We look for good ideas. Different, as Marnie said, how can we take this piece of 1 and that piece of 4 and this piece of 2 and come to put something together. We also look at some of these other things that we've talked about tonight, like, okay, we've done this, what do we do next? Here, council, here's 5 things that we should be doing next, because we know this is not the end of it. But it is more art than science at this point, just like any political decision is.
If you haven't looked at the QR code or the map app, you should, because there's a cool transparent function for us really geeky people to monitor, which is everyone can see all of the public comments, not just for the CEI Hub policy, many of the other policy discussion draft comment collection that's going on. So you can see who's saying what in live time. And I'm hitting refresh at least once a day, so in case you're curious, you can call me.
33 already up there.
And I think you're one of them, though, right? You're Tom's.
I did a test.
Well, yeah, Tom's comment. I will tell you what Tom's comment is. Text.
Well, we got a email to our project email from somebody that was trying to use it on an iPhone and said it didn't work. And so I went on my iPhone and it works. So it was operator error, not our technology.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't attacking the technology,
Yeah.
but I think it's really great for all of us to see what's going on, so we can see who's saying what, the number of comments. Some of the groups are working with Harmony at BPS, and we've set a goal. I heard from Harmony that the most public comment on a discussion draft was about 270, and so many of our nonprofits have decided that this is a time we're going to bust through that 270. And I'm being funny, but this is really important. And I said 20,000 people participated in that comp plan. And so this is, as we're wrapping up, please submit your comments.
Thanks for the entree. In your seats were 2 flyers which I want to direct you to. The first is by the group Tank the Tanks, and it has recommendations or has an overview discussion of the 4 policies. And be aware that we are trying to add to strengthening alternative 4. The other one is from the CEI Hub Task Force and has some valuable information for you to make some comments. There will be more things coming together as we draft our input to BPS, but don't hesitate to get involved with your concerns and send them in public comment period. It closes on the 16th or 17th of October. So you don't have a lot of time. Tell your friends, tell your family, anybody who knows about the Hub, ask them to weigh in on this. Your voice will hopefully matter.
Nancy, can you
Barbara.
You can say it.
Yes, I need to do it. Barbara asked me to do it. I think it's right here. Thank you, Barbara, for reminding me. Barbara Bernstein up here doing this videography for us. We certainly appreciate. Tom Armstrong. Yes, thank you. Tom Armstrong will be on Locust Focus on Monday at 10 a.m. along with City Councilor Mitch Green in District 4, who's been very supportive of the Hub, and Olivia Clark, who helped get some funding for us with regard to the Hub, to continue this conversation about the Hub. So, Locust Focus, this Monday at 10 a.m., Tom Armstrong. He has nothing better to do but to talk to us even more, right, Tom? Thank you so much. Barbara, thank you for your continued work. Oh, if you would help, if you're able to, as you leave, would you collapse chairs and put them on that far side? We greatly appreciate it. And thanks for hanging in. We know this is long, but hopefully it's been really worth your time. Thank you, panelists.